you all for joining us today. I will now turn it over to ASH Executive Director, Laurent Hubert.
Thank you, Megan. Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar held in honor of the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. The webinar today is co-hosted by ASH, Action on Smoking and Health, and the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, AATCLC, they're based in California. My name is Laurent Hubert, and I will be the moderator for this webinar today. And today you will be here about the myriad of ways in which the tobacco industry, it's an obstacle to the rights of minorities, Aboriginal communities, and you will hear examples from the United States and New Zealand. And you will also hear how you can use the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, CERD, which is a UN human rights treaty that even the United States has ratified and is bound to by law. And also the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which is the body of independent experts that monitors the implementation of this treaty to advance tobacco control. So it will be quite interesting. You'll hear about national examples of where the tobacco industry violates the rights of racial minorities and how you can use an international treaty to advance tobacco control and protect the rights of racial minorities at the local level. There will be ample time for questions, and you can, even as you hear the speakers, type them in the Q&A box, and you can use the icon at the bottom of the screen and feel free to direct them to a specific panelist. So I'll introduce our first speaker, who's Shane Kawenata Bradbrook, who's the director of Te Reo Mārama, who will discuss how the tobacco industry violates the rights of health of indigenous people like the Māori in New Zealand. Shane, the floor is yours.
Kia ora, everyone. 5 a.m. in New Zealand here. But it's good to see everyone on here. Today, what I intend to do is just talk you through a brief example on what's been happening in the past in New Zealand and also what's been.
For some reason, we lost the sound here a second.
Happening recently over the last. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We don't see the PowerPoint,
okay.
But we can hear you.
Okay. So I guess what I wanted to do initially was just talk through our history. So our history, we never had tobacco as an indigenous group, as Māori in the South Pacific. Tobacco was in about 1779. So up until then, we had no tobacco. Captain James Cook, who was one of those early European voyagers, our first encounter was actually recorded. And one of our chiefs from New Zealand literally threw water on Captain Cook, thinking that the pipe he was smoking was unusual, and that seeing the smoke coming out of his mouth, water was thrown on him, extinguished the pipe. Lucky for him, and he survived. What I wanted to talk about briefly too is who was our colonizer in regards to Aotearoa New Zealand. New Zealand, that we were a British colony between chiefs and Crown representatives, which is the basis of what my talk is going to be about. The Treaty of obviously gave us rights as and I would argue many partly a racist system, passed to Māori through gifting.
Shane, for some reason, we're losing the
Usually the
sound.
gifting meant we'll give you tobacco. From there on, and from the 1840s, tobacco has been embedded. Better?
We're losing the sound at times. I wonder maybe if you cut your you should turn the camera off, maybe, so you have a more stable.
Okay. I've already got my camera off.
Let's see if that's better. We can hear you well now. Hopefully, we will not lose the sound for the rest. Go ahead.
Okay. So since those 1800s, we have been targeted as a group of people. Here's some examples of cigarette cards showing indigenous people from our land, intrinsically tied in with the tobacco industry's drive to target our people. These are some of the other examples where they normalised and tried to push onto Māori and onto non-Māori that part of life was revolved around cigarettes. So you've got examples there of Māori carved tobacco boxes, cigarette boxes, and also other paraphernalia like ashtrays. So they use symbolisms and images that would appeal to Māori, and making it very clear early in the day that tobacco was part and parcel of life. I wanted to touch on a core thing that fell out of the Treaty of Waitangi, signed in 1840, was Article 2 of that treaty, which talks about sovereignty. And we are very clear that we did not and will not cede sovereignty, tiroranga tiratanga in our language. We have seen for decades that the industry has impeded our development as peoples. Our aspirations and goals have been impeded by and impacted on by the tobacco industry and its product, particularly economically, but obviously health. But also, one of the areas that I always touch on is the cultural, in that our sovereignty has been eroded. It's been eroded quite simply by the fact that if you die earlier, then transmission of important knowledge from your people cannot be passed down. So there's an interference, and we lay that clearly and squarely at the feet of the tobacco industry. Why? Well, this is just one example of Māori being on the prevalence rates have always been higher, sometimes up to 5 times higher than non-Māori. And that's been a trend for many decades, and we've only seen finally over the last couple of years Māori smoking at 17%. But when you have a look at European others, they're already on single figures. So all that targeting, all that normalisation has left us in a fairly dire strait. How have we combated it? Well, we talk about tobacco resistance as a movement, and that resistance as an Indigenous person is seen as part of our tradition of fighting back. And so we have been fighting back. And here's some examples of these posters. And also, one of the things that we found in Israel, of all places, was Māori Mix cigarettes. We've been sold by Philip Morris, called Māori Mix, and we confronted them as another form of exploitation of Māori by the industry. We confronted them, they withdrew it from the market. They felt like they were trying to communicate open-minded acceptance of cultural diversity. And in our view at the time, that was unacceptable. We attended Altria shareholders meeting and also got an apology for that exploitation. So, you know, we're talking modern times here, 21st century, and there's still labelling product with our name on it, as if though we're exotic. Here's one of the posters that we developed to counter the tobacco industry. We just were very blunt about it being, in effect, legalised genocide, killing, you know, our people. We targeted the tobacco industry, not the smoker. We were very blunt and clear about their culpability. We also produced this, Māori Killers. It was a phony, fake tobacco product. No hidden agendas. If it smells like, looks like, tastes like, then it's a Māori killer. These were the sorts of images that we co-opted from the tobacco industry to counter decades of their product. This was one of the industry responses at the time to the Māori murder by British American tobacco spokesperson. Like, they found that offensive, and yet killing 5,000 New Zealanders every year, millions across the globe, inoffensive, obviously. We responded to by fighting back. We held a parliamentary Māori Affairs Select Committee inquiry on the tobacco industry. We mobilised politically. We mobilised our media allies. We created a massive push and media response. We found the right talent to get in front of the cameras. We had to galvanise our community, particularly our tribal groups, our family groups, and this was coordinated right across the country. The result was this: 42 recommendations. A lot of these things have now come to be. Smoke-Free Nation was one of the critical ones, particularly for endgame, but right through to plain packaging, ban on vending machines, etc., etc. So there were massive changes from indigenous intervention into a non-indigenous parliamentary process. So massive win. Then I want to briefly touch on post-election 2023. This is our current Prime Minister. They got in October 2023. Very quickly, we became aware that tobacco lobbyists had, we're literally at the swearing-in ceremony that is held for government. We were quite shocked and taken aback by how brazen they've been, and also how brazen members of parliament and ministers have been very open about them working alongside the tobacco industry. It's quite shocking, actually. And of course, part of that is the stripping away of smoke-free laws, those ones like smoke-free generation, etc. You've also got a Prime Minister with links with his sister-in-law with the tobacco companies, Philip Morris. It's been quite a ride over the last 3 months, the impact that the industry have had. That's largely been hidden and disappeared post the inquiry in 2010. But here they are, full blast. One of the ministers that is taking it through, Costello, she has scrapped all of the quite innovative moves such as smoke-free generation, removal of nicotine from cigarettes. Again, some connections, she denies it, but her former role at the New Zealand Taxpayers Union has an association with the tobacco industry. When you have a Minister of Health saying that nicotine is as harmful as caffeine, you are in trouble. So as Indigenous people, we've come back out and started fighting this. we gathered together and came back despite us feeling at a loss for all of the hard work that we've done. And we filed what is called a Waitangi Tribunal claim, which is basically it was a piece of litigation to try and stop the repeal of the Smoke-Free Act and those particular things that were in the Act. We saw it as a breach of Indigenous rights, particularly Article 2, and we maintained the fight. The government shut us out by urgency in Parliament, and they overrode this litigation. So now we will wait for another date. But that's what the sort of things we are doing. As much as we can, we're leveraging to keep the tobacco industry in its corner, in its place, because largely where to from here? Well, we want to eliminate tobacco. We've always been as a community of Indigenous people, we want it gone. And we also want vaping gone, which has become a massive epidemic here, particularly with our younger people. I guess for us, it's about resistance. We do see it as a tradition. We see it as an honour to continue resisting the tobacco industry. We have been quite heartened by the community, both Māori and non-Māori, coming out and protesting heavily against this government. For us, that has been very enlightening in terms of years, decades of struggle. But people in New Zealand, they want to see tobacco gone now and can't see any reason why it's still here. So that's the end of my slides. And I'll hand it back to you, Laurent.
Thank you so much, Shane. Wonderful presentation, and I have a number of questions. One in the Q&A, some other ones that will definitely direct your way in a few minutes when we are back to the Q&A. So our next speaker now will present the US example. So we have Carol McGruder, who's co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. And she will address how the tobacco industry has used menthol cigarettes and menthol products to racially target African Americans in the US. And she's been fighting this for a number of years. So, Carol, the floor is yours.
All righty. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I just want to say how much we appreciate you all for joining us. Can you see my screen? Somebody give me a thumbs up.
Yes.
Not yet.
We see you, but not the, we see the,
Okay.
not the PowerPoint.
I think, Shane, you may still be sharing.
It says I'm sharing. Oh, it says my screen share is loading still.
Okay.
Okay. So while it's doing that, I guess because we're all over the world here, maybe Zoom is a little slow this morning. I have some slides for this, but I'll just go on and say it. I just really want to publicly thank ASH for their role, their leadership role in this international fight, this process. And so you've been leaders for decades, and I had the privilege of going with you all to the Conference of the Partners in Panama. And so I got a chance to really see firsthand the painstaking process that these treaties and okay, so now can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So seeing the process, which is painstaking and takes a lot of intelligence, diligence, strategy. And so we really want to thank you. So I am the very, very proud co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. We are a group of really citizen activists who were formed in 2008. And mainly in response to a lot of the budget cuts that we were seeing for priority populations, which include African Americans, and the need for funding and resources for our people more than others, because we have so many more issues and so much more of a history of oppression and lack of resources. So this is our group. We've been meeting every month ever since 2008 for the most part. Most of our folks have stayed, except people who've retired out. We're recruiting others, and part of our strategies, we're really trying to build an infrastructure that will live beyond us as we move forward. So this is what I was saying as my slides were loading. I just want to once again acknowledge ASH for their role of leadership and kind of herding the cats and keeping us focused on some of these issues. We all have our role to play in this fight. And so I just want to applaud you all for doing the role that you're doing, which is so important. I have been involved on the international front. I'm a traveler, a gypsy all my life. And so I wanted to highlight, this is a project that I was running locally from San Francisco, California, which saw the global fight, the support for the Framework Convention of Tobacco Control when it was just an idea. And this website is still up. It's called Communities Under Siege, so cus-united.org. And at that point, it was really highlighting the similarities of African Americans in the United States of America. Some of our communities operate as little poor independent African countries, even though we are in the richest country in the world. And we could see at that time the shift as the West was implementing more and more rules to protect and laws to protect their people, the shift of the tobacco industry to countries that could not do that. And we cannot do that as African Americans. Our resources, we have to rally ourselves for any of the fights, the many fights that we have here. And so this website is still up. I encourage people to go and check it out. And so this is a global fight, and we have to face it in that way. So our focus is on menthol, but if we work on hookah, we work on vapes, and all of these, the intersection of all of these things. We are talking about the end game now, because we can't keep fighting the different little, not the different little, but the different big strands of all of the facets of the tobacco industry and nicotine addiction and addicting generation after generation of people across the planet. So when President Obama signed the Tobacco Control Act in 2009, all of the flavors in combustible cigarettes were taken off the market at that time, except for menthol. And menthol was a negotiation. We knew that flavors hook children and were helped to ease the poison down our people's throats so they could get addicted. There was no science of why menthol was excluded, except that it was the tobacco industry interference. And so at the time, and this is before the e-cigarettes and all the vaping and the flavors with that, it wasn't protecting Black children, because Black people start smoking like other people do in adolescence, young adults. And so that exclusion was not based on science. And this is I wanted to highlight, this is an abstract that we submitted to the World Health Organization in Singapore in 2012. So that's 12 years ago. And so we knew that, and it's called the least of these, U.S. tobacco control policy in African Americans. And that even though this was no secret, all of these things that are on the abstract, that our community, our people have been perniciously and racistly targeted by all of the major tobacco companies. They had urban programs, that's a code for Black people, things that they explicitly would not do to white children, to white communities. And this is why over 80% of African Americans who smoke a mentholated tobacco product. And our youth are initiating with menthol. And that addiction is about science and opportunity. It's not about weak people who are just going to do something. It's about these entities, the tobacco industry, having access to our communities through various and sundry ways over all of these decades. And so that's why we are highlighting the racist, pernicious targeting of the industry. And the industry, that's their specialty, is to tease out and to find out how to make something that kills you palatable and something that you're seeking out. But with our community, it takes on a particularly harmful and particularly egregious aspect because of all of the things that we have been through as Black people in this country and Africans all over the world. So for us, menthol is a human rights and a social justice issue, and that's how we have treated it all of these years. This is the poster girl, Marie Evans, who was given these free cigarettes at 9 years old in Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States. This is part of their programming. She was dead at 54, and her family actually sued, and they actually did receive compensation. So this woman, if she were alive, she would be my age. And so that the premature deaths that we experience, the loss of life, the loss of work years, the focus of our families, then taking care of the people who are dying, 5 years of care for COPD and lung cancer is quicker, and all the other things that go with it, all the other cancers, all the other diseases, and how that affects our community's global health. So the ASH and the AATCLC, we actually sued our government about this, the FDA, and we're joined by the American Medical Associations, which is our nation's doctors, and the National Medical Associations, which is our nation's Black doctors. And so this is a case that we allowed to be dismissed, and we might be re-implementing possibly, because we were promised that there would be a rule about menthol, but because of all the political interference in our country around race, it delays public health action. And so in this delay in public health policy, it hurts us, but it hurts our whole country, and it hurts the world. This was a press conference that African American leaders had, because in America, the racial overlay is just so heavy. And it's used to very maliciously and very cynically to deflect and to delay our public health policy that would benefit us. So this was a press conference that we had as we pressure. I don't know, I know we have an international community of people are paying attention to the craziness in our country politically, and how things are just delayed, and it's just a crazy time in our country. And so this fight that we have then, and tobacco gets pushed back because things are considered to be more immediate. But this is our number one killer, the number one preventable cause of death. Kills more African Americans than any of the other issues that we perceive to be problems or that are problems combined. And so we have a policy, we have a platform that we developed years ago, and we've refined it and we've tuned it to what's going on. But it's a policy, a platform policy that we base our work on. And so the first tenet is to prohibit the sale of all flavored tobacco products, including menthol cigarettes. And I'm going to skip around to the more salient ones that have something to do with what we're talking about today. To hold the tobacco industry responsible for the irreparable harm that has been done to our community. And at this point, we are actively looking at reparations for our community for the harm that's been done, the irreparable harm. And then to advocate for policies that explicitly exclude civil or criminal penalties for use or possession of these products. And this is something that's used to block public health policy in the States. Out of all the things that Black people need and want, some people have latched on to that we need and want mentholated tobacco products. And the tobacco industry actually uses our own people to carry this rhetoric and to latch onto our legitimate fears, our legitimate grievances, to block something that could be the biggest boon for public health for our community, with the things that we need to go with it, because a law in and of itself is not magic. We need cessation, we need support, we need reparations, we need redress, along with taking these products off of the market in the United States. And the rule that's currently that we're fighting for does not prohibit these companies from manufacturing the products, but it prohibits them from distributing them in the United States. And so, of course, our fight is we want them not to be manufactured here, to be exported out to other poor people who can't afford to go through all that we have to try to protect our people here in the United States. So these are some of this is our history here. These are some pictures of the Watts riots in Los Angeles. This is what I saw as a child growing up. And this is what the industry, the tobacco industry, is saying is going to happen to us if we take menthol off the market, that because of our history of racism and police brutality, that the police are going to, go crazy and start arresting Black people because of menthol, when the law is about the head of the snake. The regulations are about the tobacco industry. It does not have anything to do with individual use or possession. People can still use these products if they get them or make them. And so that exploitation is part of why we need the CERD, and we need protection from the tobacco industry. And these are just slides of, I'm not sure where I am on time. I don't want to take up all the time, but these are slides of of some of the brutality that we face as African Americans here, and then some of the people that the tobacco industry uses, our own people, to try to block the public health policy that we're fighting. So this is a flyer from a community meeting that was held in New York. New York was famous for stop and frisk of Black and brown men, where the police could just literally stop any man walking down the street and search him and feel under his clothes. And so of linking is the menthol cigarette ban, the new stop and frisk. So this is an example of how they use what's happening in our history against us to block us. This is a press briefing that we had some years ago, that we want to be a protected class. We need the CERD to be enforced. And the other thing, as I'm closing, is that the tobacco industry, once we fight and get one success, and we're seeing that with our Māori brothers and sisters in New Zealand, then things are reversed or new products are introduced. And this is the case of how we need to dismantle the whole thing. So we fought in the state of California to get these products off the market. They put it on the ballot. We fought that and we won. And then they introduced some new non-menthol products that mimic menthol. And this is an example of that unrelenting fight that we have, and that, that will never go away. And so this is their advertisement for cool cigarettes, that they're still bold, still smooth. And we add in, they're still killing Black folks. And so we end up playing whack-a-mole, where we're chasing them. And so we all have our part to play in the international community. We stand in solidarity with others. This was from the media in Chicago, who was the first city to do something about mentholated tobacco products in the United States. And they have effectively branded us Big Tobacco. And that also we were brought over here as enslaved people to cultivate tobacco. That was the first slave crop, was tobacco, not cotton. And so I'm going to end by saying that we stand with the mighty Māori people. We are looking to have further support and collaboration and to link our causes. And we are not going anywhere. As Dr. Phil Gardner said, we had a menthol funeral in DC. We're not going anywhere. And we're going to ride this thing out until we accomplish our goals. Okay, so Lerone, I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Carol. The excellent presentation. Now I'll go to our next speaker, and thank you also, Carol, for mentioning the COP. And our next speaker might be able to also, she will present on various topics, but one of them, she might also be able to update us about a recent decision at the last conference of the parties of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control that links human rights, and that means also the Convention Against Racial Discrimination, to tobacco control. And also a reminder that today it's third day, is the day for the Convention Against Racial Discrimination. So our attorney at ASH, Kelsey Romeo-Stuppy, she will tell us how we can use the Convention on the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, and it's and the independent body that monitors the implementation of the treaty, CERD, to advance tobacco control at local level. So Kelsey, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Happy CERD Day to everyone. One quick clarification before I start. CERD, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, starts with an I. The Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination is CERD without the I. I tend to use them interchangeably, as do many people in the international community. So I will try to clarify, but when we say CERD, I think we generally collectively mean the convention and the committee. So just wanted to clear that up. I'm here today to talk a little bit about how we use human rights arguments and mechanisms to help solve the problems that were brought up by our two previous speakers. And I apologize. I know a lot of you attend a lot of the ASH webinars, and some of my presentations often start with the same slides, but I think they're very important baseline, so I'm going to start with them anyway. So if you've been here before, please bear with me. Tobacco infringes on numerous human rights: women's rights, right to life, right to health, right to education, children's rights, and the rights of different racial groups in different ways. And I especially wanted to highlight today that these are not mutually exclusive. Of course, the tobacco industry targets women of color, so that's women's rights and rights of racial populations. The right to health, everyone's right to health is targeted by the tobacco industry. So when there's targeted advertising to children, it could be children of color, which hits CERD, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and all treaties and human rights mechanisms that cover the right to health. So these aren't siloed issues, they're very connected, and that's important to remember as well. Carol was talking about sort of going right to the top and who's in charge with this. And that's something that I wanted to point out when we're discussing human rights as well. It's really important to remember the corporations might be doing the wrong, but the governments have the responsibility to protect the human rights of their citizens. So in this scenario, everyone has a right to life and to health. Governments have a duty to enforce those rights. Governments therefore have a duty to protect their citizens from the tobacco industry and the harms of tobacco. And if they don't, there's legal recourse. And that's the part of the presentation that we're talking about now. What can be done? This is another way of phrasing that. The Ruggie principles are a very simplified breakdown of that concept. Protect, respect, and remedy. Governments should protect citizens from the tobacco industry. The industry should respect human rights norms. If they don't, there are mechanisms and processes to remedy. So today is the day for the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, CERD Day. The International Covenant on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination has been signed by numerous parties, including the United States, which is really unusual. The US doesn't sign or ratify human rights treaties very often. So that's one of the reasons that we've been very focused on using CERD for work connected to menthol in the United States. But I wanted to highlight that this is not just related to menthol. Any health equity issue could come under CERD and should be brought up under CERD. CERD has a provision on the right to health, and therefore I think any tobacco-related health issue is valid to bring to the committee or to bring up under CERD. So what kind of actions, when I say bring up under CERD, what do I mean? There are numerous ways to bring this international human rights mechanism into the loop on tobacco control. The first one is a general submission or report. Carol mentioned the lawsuit against the FDA led by AATCLC and ASH. When we filed that lawsuit, we also filed a report to CERD, informing them of what was going on in the United States and asking them to take action as well. The action that CERD can take is that they can report back to the United States and ask them to do something, or ask them to report on tobacco in their next cycle or anything like that. In the human rights community, this is often called name and shame, and it can be really, really powerful. I know compared to a lot of legal remedies, this doesn't sound like it has a lot of teeth, but in the world of international law, where a lot of things are soft and political, a name and shame can have a lot of impact. So because the United States is a party to CERD, CERD has the opportunity to call on them to do something. So that was something that we call an out-of-cycle submission. The United States was not up for reporting at that time, but we submitted anyway and asked CERD to take action. Another option is an in-cycle report. Every party that's party to a human rights treaty is required to report in a cycle. Usually they're every 5 years. Every treaty varies a little bit, just to make sure it's nice and confusing for all of us. But the United States is required by their treaty obligations to report to CERD, as is any other country that's a party to CERD. So when the United States reported, we submitted something that's called a parallel or shadow report. They're becoming more known as parallel reports, but for years they were called shadow reports. The government submits a report, and civil society has the opportunity to submit one as well, just in case the government isn't telling the committee everything they should be telling them. So when the US submitted their report, we submitted ours as well, highlighting tobacco industry health equity issues in the United States, specifically menthol. And we encourage anyone who's listening from other countries to consider doing this as well. We do this for all treaties, not just CERD, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but this is a really powerful way to bring the committee into the loop. Another way to encourage the committee to take action on racial issues related to tobacco is when they are writing a recommendation or maybe doing something like changing their bylaws or changing the way they report their reporting system. So I'm going to start with general recommendation. The committee can write a general recommendation on a topic of their choosing, and it's sort of like a guideline for how the committee sees the treaty should be applied to the world. So currently, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination is drafting General Recommendation number 37, which, if you can see on the screen, focuses on racial discrimination in the enjoyment of the right to health. This is incredibly relevant to our work on tobacco. We've been involved in the drafting process since the beginning. Usually when the committee drafts something like this, they put out a request for input from governments and from civil society, and we have been urging them to include tobacco, and the first draft does include tobacco. So that's a big victory. It's very exciting. They're about to review the second draft in April, and fingers crossed. We asked for more than what's currently in it, but fingers crossed tobacco stays in it. I think a gold medal would be more than the one reference we have to tobacco. A silver medal would be what we have now. A bronze medal would be something like a reference to non-communicable diseases, but not tobacco specifically. And then I think all of those are a victory. And I'm really hoping that we get the gold medal on this one, but we'll take a silver too. I mentioned earlier that we use other human rights mechanisms as well to report, and I wanted to highlight a couple. There's a declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples. There's not a reporting mechanism for UN DRIP, which is an interesting acronym, but we try to include references to UN DRIP in our reporting to other treaty bodies. So as I mentioned, they're incredibly interlinked and interwoven. When we report to something like CEDAW, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, if Indigenous women have been targeted, we want to make sure to point that out with a specific reference to UN DRIP. We also watch for calls for input on any of the interrelated topics. So there's a special rapporteur, a person in the UN system whose job it is to focus on specific topics. And a lot of times they ask for calls for input from civil society. And we're often monitoring those and rallying our community to respond to make sure that tobacco is at the forefront of these people's minds. And as an aside, if you're on our email list, that's why you might get a lot of emails from me asking you to sign on to different things, often rather urgently, because the UN system doesn't always give us the longest time to do that. But I think it's really important that we're present as much as possible as a tobacco control community, because the human rights community isn't thinking about tobacco, but we need to be thinking about tobacco in the human rights mechanisms. I wanted to point out our Tobacco and Human Rights Hub on our website. We collect all of the submissions, all of the statements, journal articles, things like that, that are related to tobacco and human rights, to try to keep them in one place and make them convenient for advocates. It's a living website that's constantly being updated. So if you see anything missing, please feel free to send me an email and let me know that you'd like an addition. But in the meantime, please feel free to check it out. And I think that's it for me. So thank you very much. And back to you, Laurent.
Thank you, Kelsey. And thank you for reminding us that there are a number of tools that can be used within the human rights system to advance tobacco control. And a number of human rights bodies have recognized that the tobacco industry and its products are a key obstacle to a number of human rights. So there's a number of questions that I have. Some have been asked in the Q&A, some have been sent to me directly. So I will take back and forth, some that were sent to me and some of the ones that are there in the Q&A. So the first one, it's actually for combination for you, for Shane and Kelsey. But so the Maoris, the Maori community was at the epicenter of the tobacco control law in New Zealand. And with this reversal of the tobacco law, it seems like it's a clear obstacle to Maori sovereignty, right? And an violation of the Article 2 that you mentioned, Shane. And it seemed like also in this context, could it also even be a violation of CERD by New Zealand? And could it be framed that way? So that's the first question that I have that for both of you. Maybe Shane, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question, and it's great, Kelsey, some of your references around, you know, issues that are combined with our social justice struggles. So yeah, look, for me, it's critical that we look at things that advance our cause. So when we're talking sovereignty and we see it as a breach of that, we sometimes you get so isolated, you forget that there's these other international frameworks and mechanisms. So it'd be good to catch up with you, Kelsey, to advance some of that thinking. So yeah, on Article 2, it's been largely on an indigenous platform that has advanced tobacco control in New Zealand context. In fact, you know, when you look at it from an end game point of view, it's advanced the global approach and strategy. So yeah, for me, it's just ongoing. Continue to fight the fight, Laurent. Carol?
Kelsey, were you going to add anything to that? Then I have a question for Carol after that.
But I think that CERD would be an excellent mechanism to pursue this for New Zealand and for Indigenous people in any other country. I think CERD is designed for that, and that would be an excellent use.
Yeah, thank you.
My next question is for Carol. And so why has it taken so long for a menthol ban to still be coming to place in the United States? And you mentioned that the industry played a key role in blocking, creating fear, but it was going to lead to criminalization of young folks. So what has taken so long, and what is that really dual role of the industry? On one side, they claim to care about racial minorities in the United States, but for example, when California passed a menthol ban, they immediately sued. So could you address that? And then my other question for the audience is, how do we best articulate that banning menthol will not lead to increased criminalization of young men? So sorry, those were a lot of questions in one.
Yes. So the tobacco industry, the interference from the inception of these issues has always been there. You know, there in Dr. Valerie Ruth Malone, a research paper that's almost 20 years old now, Smoking with the Enemy, with their own internal classified documents from the tobacco industry that were released because of litigation, where they outline how they went in with every single African-American leadership group, giving money, seeding our media. So that's the foundation of all this. That's still there. Vestiges of it are still there, while we have made great strides and inroads in getting some of our strongest and boldest African-American leadership groups to really come out strongly in support of taking menthol off the market. But the initial exclusion was because, you know, public health didn't think we could get it. And so there are many things that it's a negotiation, it's a bargaining chip, it's something that we push back to deal with later on. And at the time when menthol was excluded, when we were formed the year before, we had absolutely no funding. And I personally was using my own money to go back to the FDA, the meetings of the TIPSAC, to see. There was just no, you know, they were webcasting who was in the room, and there was nobody in the room that was representing Black people or people of color or LGBTQ. It was this vacuum because we have so many issues and there was no funding for that. So only crazy people like myself who would go back there. And I actually stopped going when the FDA, the TPSAC, they announced their research, because there's all many different moving parts of this. And there are a lot of people who make a living in public health off of this going on forever. And they're very comfortable with having a job and having research, and that leads to the next research project. And, it's all different angles. And so we really, as the AATCLC, inserted ourselves in the process and started to bang the drum about the plight of Black people and the neglect, the benign and malignant neglect of our government to address our needs. And so the industry is there. And so it's just so convoluted, the racial overlay of what's a public health issue. And so when Canada took it off the market, when the EU, there was no talk about, there are Black people all over the world. There's no talk about what the Canadian Black people wanted, because they hadn't been racistly targeted the way African Americans had been. And the issue was different. And that's where you can really see the success of the targeting is our smoking prevalence with mentholated tobacco products. And how that's embedded. But so every step of the way, they're there. We are there with our little pennies, and we play checkers, they play chess. We have a 3-year grant to get something done, and they're there looking at the long haul, the long game. And that's why, we don't have the resources, but we do have an army of people around the world who can really make an impact on this. And we are making an impact. And so it's slow, it's painful. And they're counting on just kind of wearing us down. So we go away, but we are really actively working to train other folks, to lift up other folks, so that we keep going as long as we need to. And so we know how long we fought for justice in this country. We're still fighting for it. And this is something that's worth fighting for. And that's it's not magic, getting.
Carol, I have a
Yes.
question for you. So if we in a 10-second elevator speech, if I were like a policymaker and I was like, we're in the elevator, I'm about to go into the Senate, Congress, whatever it is, the Parliament, and I tell you, I'm really concerned it's going to lead to criminalization of young men. What would be your response? How would you tell me that I'm wrong?
I can't do it in 10 seconds, but I can say that we need police reform in our country. And we can't wait for that to happen, to deal with the biggest killer, the biggest targeter, which is the tobacco industry. We can't wait till we get these other things. We have to be working on these things in tandem at the same time. And that, there are risks in everything that we do, but we know what the risks are, leaving these products on the market and letting these companies continue to make billions of dollars in profit off of our pain and death and suffering of our communities.
And I think it's important to remind also everyone that here we're not talking about the use of menthol cigarettes. No one is going to be arrested. No young man will be, or African-American smoker, person who smokes will be stopped for using a menthol cigarette. It would be the sale.
That's right.
Sale of the product.
It's the head of the snake. It's the manufacturing. And sometimes this is compared with the war on drugs that, we have all these shows on now about the crack cocaine epidemic and how many Black and brown men ended up in jail. And that was a totally different animal. And also our US government was complicit in the whole crack rollout in this country with Black people. So it's totally different. And we're talking about the manufacturers. And we're talking about support and services, that addiction is a public health issue. It's not a criminal issue. And I think we're clear on that concept. Yes.
Listen, I'm conscious of time, so I want to quickly I'm talking about manufacturers. I want to address then the question that back to Shane. Stan asked a question about when did the cigarette cards first appear, who was depicted, and what did the companies accomplish by affiliating with Māori people. So it sounds like that's Shane. Do you want to address that quickly? Shane, can you hear?
Okay, yeah.
Can you not hear?
Sorry, Laurent, I couldn't hear a word.
Okay, sorry, I'll repeat the question. When did so it's the question that Stan Glantz put on the Q&A. When did the cigarette cards first appear? Who was depicted? And what did the companies, the corporations, the tobacco companies accomplish by affiliating with these people in marketing their Māori? Shane, were you able to hear?
I can hear it now. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think you
Okay.
need to repeat, Laurent.
Did you
You
have-
need to repeat it.
So no, just about, it was that first question that Stan had asked in the Q&A. When did the cigarettes card first appear? When did the tobacco industry try to use Māori visuals and those card books, and what did the accomplishment?
Yeah. Imagery. I think largely that was occurring even though already they were embedding, marketing techniques that made Māori look exotic and placed us, we was almost like put in there, like we should be proud of the fact that they were a long time. You're talking over 100 years ago. And then
Seems like we're
you're looking at the paraphernalia. Yeah, it's bad connection.
Unfortunately, I feel like we have a backlash connection. I'm going to have one last question for Kelsey very quickly, and then we'll unfortunately have to end. Kelsey, you did mention the general recommendation as a key document that's being negotiated, basically, which is an authoritative interpretation on and a guidance for governments on how to implement the right to health articles in CERD, in the Convention against the International Convention against all racial discrimination. So what can people do at this stage to, if there's a way to influence and support that process to make sure that tobacco is adequately addressed in it, given that it is an obstacle to racial rights? And once it's there, how could they use it?
So the CERD committee is going to bring this back up in their April session, so coming up very soon. We are hoping that we can reach out and influence a couple of the committee members. We may be reaching out to you all, our community, to sign a letter asking for something like that. Unfortunately, we don't exactly know what's going to come out of the April committee. It might be another draft, or it might be a final version of the document. But once it's a finalized version of the document, we encourage people all around the world to use this in their local advocacy. Our DC partners, the DC Tobacco Free Coalition, have used our human rights arguments, our shared human rights arguments, to further tobacco control locally, and we hope to see lots of others doing that as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to take this opportunity to thank the wonderful panelists, Shane and Carol, who joined us today, and Shane at 5 o'clock in the morning, and Kelsey for a wonderful presentation on ICERD. So again, join us for future webinars. Please sign on to info-org if you wanted to hear more, and encourage you also to use the U.S. Tobacco Lobbyists and Lobbying Tracker. And there's a number of webinars that we'll continue to do over the next few months. And definitely also stay tuned for the work that Carol just mentioned that AATCLC is doing along that we at ASH. We're so proud to partner up with them in the work with the FDA to get the FDA to quickly take action on menthol. So stay tuned, as AATCLC has a lot to communicate in the next few weeks in order to make sure that everyone in the US is protected against menthol tobacco products. So thank you so much for joining us, and hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.